Welcome to The Explainer. So here's a wild idea. Could you really become a language interpreter in just 30 days? It sounds intense, right? Well, today we're going to break down a fascinating roadmap that lays out exactly how to do it day by day. The guide's first message isn't even about technique. It's about purpose. And I love this quote. The idea here is you're not just swapping words back and forth. No, you're building a bridge between entire cultures. In framing it like that, well, it turns this technical challenge into a really meaningful mission, right from the get. Okay, so the guide gives you 30 individual challenges. But honestly, to wrap your head around it, it's way easier to think of it in 3 key phases. It's kind of like building a house, right? You've got to pour the foundation first, then you build the actual structure, and finally you add all the professional finishing touches. So let's start at the beginning with phase 1. All right, phase 1. This is all about that bedrock. Before you can even dream of interpreting a single sentence, the guide is super clear. You have to build an unshakable linguistic foundation. Look, this isn't the flashy, exciting part, but it's probably the most important. So that first week, it's basically a full-on language boot camp. And we're not talking about setting some vague goal like get better at French. Nope. It's about defining a specific proficiency target. From there, it's total immersion. You got to make the language part of your everyday life, not just something you study for an hour. And yeah, that means digging out those old grammar books, because every single rule is a tool you're going to need later. And just look at how specific these goals are. The guide basically says tourist-level language skills just won't cut it. The absolute minimum you're aiming for is B2, and that means real fluency. But if you're serious about this, the real target for any pro is C1. That's the ability to use the language with total precision and flexibility, especially when the stakes are high. This right here, this is the classic iceberg analogy in action. The words you hear, that's just the tiny tip. The real meaning is buried deep down in the culture. So in Nigerian Pidgin, what sounds like a simple is actually this incredibly rich expression of realization. A direct word-for-word translation isn't just wrong, it's completely meaningless. This is exactly why the guide says you're translating culture, not just words. Okay, so once that foundation is solid, we move into phase 2. And the focus totally shifts here. It's not just about knowing the language anymore, it's about using it under pressure. This is where a fluent speaker really starts to transform into a true interpreter. So here's the big question for this phase. Okay, you're fluent. Great. But can you do the mental gymnastics required to listen, process, and speak all at the same time? It's a totally unique muscle, right? And to build it, the guide introduces a series of very specific training exercises. The first drill is something called sight translation, and this is a really crucial stepping stone. Why? Because it isolates one part of the whole interpreting process. You're reading with your eyes and speaking with your mouth, which trains your brain to process one language and output another, but without that added pressure of listening at the same time. It's like the perfect warm-up for the main event. And from there, you build up to the absolute pinnacle of the craft, simultaneous interpretation. Yep, this is that high-wire act you see at places like the UN. The goal is to stay just a few seconds behind the speaker, and that takes an incredible amount of focus. The guide really stresses that it's a balancing act. You need perfect accuracy, of course, but you also need a smooth, confident delivery that doesn't distract the person you're interpreting for. But how on earth do you practice something so complex? You can't just do it in a vacuum, and that's why the guide gives you this absolute goldmine of real-world materials. See, practicing with UN speeches or international news, it's not just about learning the vocabulary. It's about exposing yourself to the real pace, the different accents, and yeah, the real pressures of the job. And that brings us to the final phase, phase 3. This is where we move beyond the technical skills and into the nitty-gritty of building a career. The guide is very clear about this. Having the skill is one thing, but turning it into an actual profession, that's a whole other challenge. A huge, huge part of this final phase is about finding a mentor. I mean, listen to this claim. A mentor can take you even further than a degree or diploma. Wow, but why? Well, think about it. A textbook can't catch your bad habits. It can't point out those subtle little mistakes you don't even know you're making. Getting that expert feedback from someone who's been there, that is the absolute fastest way to go from being good to being hired. So the entire 30-day challenge really leads up to this final strategic push. It's all about going from being a generalist to becoming a specialist. You're asked to really define your niche. Is it going to be tech, diplomacy, medicine? And then you start researching employers in that space and building your network. It's about creating a professional identity for yourself, not just having a skill set. So, we've gone through this whole intensive 30-day plan, and we've broken it down into these 3 key phases. But what's the one big takeaway from this entire roadmap? It really boils down to this simple 3-step progression, and the guide makes it crystal clear that you cannot skip a step. You have to earn your foundation before you can even think about building your craft. And only once you've truly mastered that craft can you sharpen it into a professional career. Look, at the end of the day, the guide gives you the map. We've just walked through the entire 30-day journey from start to finish. But a map is pretty useless until you take that first step, right? And according to this whole plan, that first step is simple. Set your goal. So the final question isn't for me, it's for you. What's your day one gonna look like?